Number 1. Scaphism, the boats. And finally, we've arrived at what is quite possibly the worst way any human being has ever been killed. This one comes from ancient Persia, roughly around the 5th century BC. It's called scaphism, and even after researching all 5 of these punishments, this is the only one that genuinely made me feel sick. Here's how it worked. The victim would be stripped naked and placed inside a hollowed-out wooden boat. A second, identical boat would be placed on top, creating a shell with the person's head, hands, and feet sticking out through holes cut into the sides. So far, not great, but nothing you can't handle. Just wait. The executioners would then force-feed the victim a mixture of milk and honey until they developed severe diarrhea. Then, they'd smear more milk and honey all over the exposed parts of their body, their face, their hands, their feet, paying special attention to their eyes, ears, mouth, and genitals. Then, they'd take this human milk and honey sandwich and set it adrift in a stagnant swamp. And then they'd wait. The honey and milk would attract every insect in the area. Flies, ants, wasps, beetles, all of them swarming around the exposed flesh, feeding on the sweet mixture, laying eggs in every crevice they could find. The diarrhea pooling inside the boats would breed maggots and more insects that would begin eating the victim from the inside out. All while the person was still alive, still conscious, still being force-fed milk and honey every day by their captors to make sure they didn't die of dehydration too quickly. The most detailed account we have comes from the Greek historian Plutarch, who describes a Persian soldier named Mithridates who was executed this way after accidentally killing the Persian prince Cyrus the Younger. According to Plutarch, Mithridates lasted 17 days before he finally died. 17 days of being slowly consumed alive by insects while floating in a swamp, unable to move, unable to escape, unable to do anything but scream. By the time his captors finally pried the boats apart, his body had been so thoroughly consumed that there was barely anything recognizable left. His flesh had been eaten away. His organs were filled with insects. He had essentially been digested alive. What makes scaphism uniquely horrifying compared to every other punishment on this list is the time. The brazen bull kills you in an hour. The blood eagle is over in minutes. Even lingqi, as slow as it is, caps out at about 3 days. Scaphism kept people alive and suffering for over 2 weeks. 2 weeks of insects burrowing into your body, eating you alive from the inside out, while your captors showed up every morning with more milk and honey to keep the cycle going. It wasn't just a punishment. It was a project. Number 2. The Blood Eagle. It's the 9th century somewhere in Scandinavia, and a Viking warrior has just captured the man who killed his father. He's been waiting years for this moment. A simple death would be too merciful. This calls for something special, something his father's spirit can watch from Valhalla and know that his death has been properly avenged. This calls for the Blood Eagle. Now, there's been debate among historians about whether the Blood Eagle was actually performed, or if it was just something the Norse poets made up to sound tough. But multiple sagas describe it in enough detail that most scholars believe it probably happened at least a few times. And here's how it supposedly worked. The victim would be placed face down. A blade would be used to cut open the skin along the spine. Then, one by one, the ribs would be hacked away from the backbone and pried outward until they stuck out from the body like wings, while the victim was still alive and breathing. And then, as a final touch, the lungs would be pulled out through the opening and draped over the exposed ribs. The wings would flutter as the victim took their last agonizing breaths, creating the image of a bloody eagle. The most famous account comes from the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok. When Ragnar, one of the most legendary Viking warriors of all time, was captured and killed by King Aelle of Northumbria by being thrown into a pit of snakes, his sons vowed revenge. When they finally captured Aelle, they performed the Blood Eagle on him. The sagas describe Aelle's back being carved open while he was still very much alive, his ribs cracked and spread, his lungs pulled out and laid upon his shoulders. Whether every detail is historically accurate or not, the fact that the Vikings told these stories to each other as examples of what happens when you mess with the wrong family tells you a lot about the culture. This wasn't a punishment for petty crime. This was reserved for the kind of insult that could only be answered with the most savage, theatrical form of execution imaginable. You didn't just kill your enemy, you turned his body into a message. Some historians have argued that the Blood Eagle is just a misinterpretation of poetic language in the sagas, that phrases about carving an eagle on someone's back were metaphorical, not literal. But other scholars point out that the Norse had plenty of perfectly normal ways to describe killing someone, and they specifically chose to describe this process in graphic, step-by-step detail across multiple independent sources. At some point, you have to accept that maybe, just maybe, these guys actually did it. The Vikings were many things, but subtle was not one of them. One thing that makes the Blood Eagle even more disturbing is the ritual aspect. Some accounts describe the executioner rubbing salt into the open wound while the ribs were being spread apart. Whether this was to add to the pain or had some kind of religious significance, nobody's really sure. But the Blood Eagle wasn't just an execution, it was a ceremony, a sacrifice to Odin. The victim wasn't just being killed, they were being offered to the gods as proof that their killer was worthy of their father's legacy. When you think about it from that perspective, the cruelty wasn't a bug, it was the entire point.